fight against tuberculosis continues, and experts are continuing to make major strides. A recent study by the University of Cape Town PhD graduate may possibly have reversed the assumption that coughing is the primary driver of M.Tuberculosis transmission. According to Ryan Dinkele's study, breathing alone is estimated to contribute to over 90% of the tuberculosis bacterium exhaled by patients with active TB. Ryan joins us now live from the mother city to tell us more about this. Some very interesting insights there, Ryan Dinkele. Thank you very much for joining us. And maybe just explain that distinction that has now been discovered in your research, the assumptions that were previously associated with the transmission of tuberculosis and what the latest findings reveal.
Yeah, thank you for having me this morning. So my PhD obviously was centered around studying how Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which is the bacteria that causes TB, are aerosolized. And for many years, the primary assumption has been that TB is spread by sick individuals, and primarily actually that it's aerosolized through coughing. We've known that things like singing, speaking, are also able to release and transmit the bacteria. But by the vast majority, the assumption has been that it's been through coughing. And so one of the goals of my research was to look at what other sort of respiratory maneuvers were capable of aerosolizing MTB. And we were quite surprised to see that even just normal breathing alone, although it aerosolizes less bacteria per breath, the simple fact that you breathe so many times a day ultimately makes it a vast contributor to the aerosolization of Mycobacterium tuberculosis.
Yeah, and you said it was quite high, around 90% if I'm not mistaken. So does that raise any concerns for you or your colleagues around the rapidness at which it could potentially not start to spread, but spread in general as these new revelations come about?
I mean, I think the fact that we've potentially discovered this now doesn't change what is happening in the disease. But I think it's a bit of a wake-up call to realize that actually simply looking for people in the community that are coughing, simply covering your mouth while you're coughing and treating people that are sick may not be enough to control the epidemic. So I don't think it speaks to increasing spread. I think really what it wakes us up to is the fact that stopping the transmission of this bacteria is possibly far more difficult than we previously thought. And it opens doors to the fact that people that are infected with the bacteria but potentially not symptomatic may then also be infectious. So conventional symptomatic screening approaches may not be an effective way to stop the spread of this disease. So unfortunately, right now, it doesn't really have a clinical application in the immediate sense, in that it's more driving research agenda and maybe suggesting that the paradigm in which we understand this disease needs to expand somewhat.
Yeah, and of course, the treatment of the tuberculosis then would also have to be looked into, Brian. Maybe just the traditional ways in which normal tuberculosis is and drug-resistant tuberculosis is treated may also have to be researched and perhaps modeled in such a way that will perhaps accommodate the findings of this particular research somewhere down the line.
Yeah, so a major driver for the research that we do is also this understanding that although antibiotics are incredibly effective at treating sick individuals, they do have limitations. And we've had antibiotics, a fairly decent one since the 60s. But in South Africa, even though we've had these antibiotics for so many years, we still have this huge pandemic or epidemic going on that millions of people around the country are struggling with. So I think what we're looking into trying to understand is if we can very sensitively find individuals that have evidence of these bacteria but aren't sick, are there other ways that we could intervene to support the use of antibiotics? But the reality is we can't blanket treat everyone because then resistance is going to be a huge problem. So I think the applications of our research and our method of detection of these bacteria are vast and multifaceted. And so we really are, after this observation of tidal breathing being a major contributor, we're starting to look and do community surveys and try and find out how many people in the community who aren't sick can we start to find who are breathing these bacteria. And based on those results, we're hoping to inform sort of targeted intervention studies going forward to look for different ways to control the spread, to treat and help people that may be infected, even if they may not be sick.
To control and to treat it, Ryan, but earlier on you said that there might be some limitations with the conventional way of screening. So, and I do know that the research goes into that component as well. What would some of the alternative ways of screening for TB look like? Or is this something that you are all still unpacking?
So historically, the major way to diagnose or to detect people with TB would be through sputum. Sputum is the substance that sick individuals produce from their lungs. So you cough up sputum, and we look in that for the bacteria. The problem with sputum is that not everyone with TB can produce sputum, specifically young individuals and individuals with HIV. And if someone can't produce sputum, that doesn't mean they don't have the bacteria. It just means they don't produce the sample that we conventionally look in. Another problem with sputum is that the technologies we use to detect the bacteria is that they have fairly insensitive limits of detection. So it could be that the bacteria are there, we just can't find them, also suggesting the person has the bacteria, but it's difficult to know. An alternative approach has been chest x-rays, which have been fairly sensitive. With chest x-rays, you can see mild pathology or damage in the lung, even if the individual is not outwardly sick sometimes. The approach that we're taking is to actually look for the bacteria on people's breath. So when you breathe, cough, talk, sing, you produce little droplets in your breath that are called bioaerosols, which is what my PhD was studying. And these are droplets that are generated from your peripheral lungs. So your alveolar spaces where gaseous exchange happens, that's where M.TB infects, and that's where these particles are generated. And so we're actually looking on the breath at these particles for the bacteria. And what it seems to be the case is that it's a very, very sensitive way of finding these bacteria, even when sputum fails. So although our application right now isn't sort of in the diagnostic space, it is bioaerosol sampling in general is a potentially useful way of screening going forward, because it works without sputum. It works whether or not sputum bacterial load is high. And we're not the only people in the world working on this. There's a few other groups around the world who are looking at various approaches to study the bioaerosol as a potential useful way to predict TB outcomes, to see who is infected, etc. So, yeah, I think that'll be an interesting avenue going forward to better understand who all are infected.
And then just finally, Ryan, what are the next steps? The research has been done, findings very interesting. By breathing, talking and singing, you could be transmitting tuberculosis. So what are the immediate steps going forward based on the findings of this research?
So one of the conclusions from my paper about the aerosolization through breathing was that it suggests a mechanism by which asymptomatic individuals could release these bacteria. So individuals that are infected and not outwardly sick, but could still potentially be infectious. And so the immediate next step was sampling patients within a clinic. So we sampled patients in a TB clinic diagnosed as TB positive and TB negative. And what we found there was that irrespective of diagnosis, they were aerosolizing bacteria. Then that led us, and so this is all ongoing work, now we're doing a cross-sectional survey in a community in which our research site is based. And we're actually sampling randomly throughout the community to see, even if you're not presenting at a TB clinic, can we find it? And so at the moment, our research agenda is to get a better sense. This is like taking a first glimpse in something that no one's really ever looked at before. And so we're trying to get a good sense of who all is infected and how we can categorize people based on immunological status, based on bioaerosol positivity, based on chest x-ray, so that we can follow individuals going forward and see which of these people are at a higher risk of progressing to TB disease, which of them are at a low risk. It's not everyone is going to get TB. So, it's not to say that everyone we identify has a meaningful risk of TB. So it's really trying to understand these dynamics in the setting. And one of the goals of that would be trying to understand the transmission of these bacteria. So we've shown the aerosolization of the bacteria, which is one component of transmission, but linking that to the infection of a new host has proven quite challenging. So it's the trying to understand asymptomatic infection and trying to understand asymptomatic transmission are our major research agendas at the moment.
Very interesting insights indeed. Ryan Dinkele taking us through his PhD research there around tuberculosis and its transmission. Thank you very much for your time this morning.